I am Joe Legato, and this is the Joe Legato Show. We're going to be talking about at the end of history. And so, for the longest time, we thought that we were at the end of history. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, it removed the Soviet model from the board of potential competitors, and we thought the capitalistic system was the only system around that was capable of being successful in growing a country. We also had the collapse of the non-aligned movement, specifically with the bombing and fomentation of rebellion throughout Yugoslavia, and that removed the non-aligned movement as a major competitor. Sometime in the future, we'll probably talk about how the non-aligned movement ended up becoming the multipolar world movement that we hear a lot about today. And so you can think of the multipolar world movement almost as the successor movement to the non-aligned movement. And so it was very shocking for the United States for a new model to come about, for a new model to arise. The United States thought that they were at the end of history, that they toppled any significant ideological competitors. And China, though, has decided to become a competitor, a world superpower, based off of doing essentially the complete opposite of the United States. Whereas the United States destroys things, China builds things. And so we have some pictures here. We see countries attacked, bombed, sabotaged, or attempted government overthrow since World War II. Places like Iran, which are demonized by the West, particularly America, they've not done that. They had the Iran-Iraq War, but aside from that, that was not really Iran's fault. That was fomenting of tensions by the United States and also some sectarian conflicts on both sides that makes both responsible. But the United States has been historically responsible for many, many, many wars, particularly since the end of World War II. And so the United States destroys things. Okay? You see the death tolls of wars since 9/11. This is a very conservative estimate. I've seen other estimates putting it at over 1 million people. We see Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan. That doesn't include places like Libya, which the no-fly zone and the Western colonial response to that caused the collapse of Gaddafi's government, very inhumane treatment of Gaddafi. And we can think of that as likely occurring because Gaddafi wanted to take Africa and the African Union to de-dollarize. And the United States is very fearful of de-dollarization. And so instead of having Gaddafi as the leader of a stable, highly successful Libya, you now have open-air slave markets in Libya. And many people died because of that. And so you see the United States destroys things. They destabilize countries, destroy people, extract their resources. Whereas China, on the other hand, they build things. Looking here, you see trains being built in China between 2008 and 2018. China built a vast train network in order to maximize the usage of its human capital. Make sure that their people can go where they're necessary in order to be the most successful and to benefit the nation. And China does this. America does not build infrastructure anymore. They, not only in their own country, but elsewhere, they don't build any infrastructure. They destroy things, they start wars, etc., etc. And you see that not only does China domestically build infrastructure, but they've been very successful with their Belt and Road Initiative. Here it's called One Belt, One Road. In other places you'll see it called BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. So China has been very, very successful in terms of creating an alternative model. China's rise has created significant opportunities for other countries, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, which China has been benefiting with its trade. We'll talk about that later, but also in other areas of the world, such as Africa, Latin America. And they've benefited from China's growing demand for imports and investment in their infrastructure, as well as China being such a manufacturing powerhouse, exporting a ton of goods. They've been a counterbalance to the United States. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, China has provided an alternative. United States got very egotistical because there were no alternatives to the United States, and they became a bully to a lot of nations. And because of that, a lot of countries were very happy, thrilled really, with China being a counterbalance. So they see this as a competitor to the dominance of the US in the global system, and that increased competition benefits all these lesser nations. There's an alternative development model, which for a long time we thought the Western model was the only way to develop, but China's alternative development model combines elements of state capitalism, authoritarianism, and nationalism, which has been very attractive to various countries. And particularly those disillusioned with the liberal democratic model promoted by the United States. I remember reading a study on this where I believe it's since 2007, although don't quote me on that, that liberal democratic models have been declining all across the world. And so other various models, which China allows every other model to exist, China doesn't enforce its own model on other countries. Other models are ascendant, while liberal democratic models just have not been functioning. And part of the reason is because we're seeing that in the United States, there's a uniparty controlled by big business oligarchical interest that controlled the system. And in other countries, if a country elects a person who's not pro-America, America will just overthrow the democratically elected leaders. And so liberal democracies have just not been working anywhere in the world right now. In terms of infrastructure investments, China provides an alternative model with its Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to connect China with other parts of Asia, Europe, and Africa through infrastructure investments. And that has been welcomed by many countries that see it as a way to promote economic development and connectivity. And China does this both to benefit itself in terms of being considered more highly by other countries, but also to make sure that if the United States tries to economically sanction it by something like an embargo, while China is building up its navy, China will still have land-based routes in order to trade goods, export its own goods, and get things within its country that it needs. And so this provides both land and sea-based ways that China could continue trading, and it makes it harder for the United States to restrict China. And then in terms of diplomatic engagement, China has formed its own alternative model through active diplomacy, a focus on multilateralism, so they don't force their own model on other countries. And this includes initiatives such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, and BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. If I remember correctly, at least 9 countries have been interested in joining BRICS in recent days. So a lot of countries are interested in this alliance of growing developing powers, which makes up a large portion of the world's population, a large portion of the world's resources, and is growing in terms of its GDP compared to the G7 nations of primarily colonial powers or former colonial powers. And so these various forms of diplomatic engagement increase influence and partnership with other countries. And so in summary, for this At the End of History segment, the rise of China and its alternative model to the United States have been attractive to many countries due to the economic opportunities, the counterbalance to the United States, alternative developmental model offered, infrastructure investments that China does, and the diplomatic engagement that China offers. As China continues to grow in influence and power, its impact on the global system will continue to be significant.